There was a March for Science on Earth Day this year, so my friends and I did the logical thing. We dressed up like 19th century mad scientists and got in the streets. Well, first we got in the park and milled around, listening to speeches and looking at signs, talking to people, and just generally waiting around. But then we got in the streets.
I mean, I did pretty well with Fred Hodge, but
Oh, there you are.
yeah, for the kids underneath.
I was looking for
They started waiting on people to left the car. Well, you know.
You've definitely got water beating going on.
Civilization isn't just a bunch of people hanging out. Civilization is people building on each other's skills and abilities and upon the knowledge of those who came before. Science and the technology that comes from it is the core of civilization. People didn't just start farming one day, they learned about plants and animals, studying what worked and what didn't until they could reliably raise crops and breed livestock. That's science. People learned through trial and error and reason about the properties of materials until they could build homes, bridges, machinery, and rockets to the moon. A smart person left to himself can accomplish a lot. But as part of a civilization, he has access to far more knowledge and skills and support structure than he could ever come up with in 1,000 lifetimes. That accretion of knowledge is science. And it isn't just guys in lab coats, somewhere separate from us. Science and art have always been tightly connected. Paints and dyes were the major drivers of chemistry since before it was chemistry. And the writing that gives us literature also stores our scientific knowledge, and in turn is brought to us by chemically and mechanically engineered presses. And now physics brings it to us by computer. Whatever you do for a living or for enjoyment is inseparable from the science that glues our civilization together. And there in the rain is your humble narrator. There are barbarians at the gates. There are those who can't understand or simply don't care about what makes our society work. They are willing to destroy anything if it helps them make $1 or look like a big shot. And unfortunately, they end up in charge of things. In my country, the United States, the budget for space exploration is less than the military's budget for air conditioning. And our leaders think that is reasonable. Most innovation in our industries actually comes from publicly funded research, mostly in publicly funded universities. And the percentage of the federal budget for scientific research usually hovers around 2%. Some call this a capitalism problem, but even the capitalists are hurt by this. It's a psychopath problem. It's a problem of people who cannot follow the most basic law of civilization. Don't shit where you eat. And in today's world, we eat everywhere. It was good to see the support from people along the route, and it was quite encouraging to be among other like-minded people. But I doubt there was anyone here who wasn't wishing we didn't have to do this. I'm not religious, but I know people who are. Some of them work in science. I don't see how a belief in God can make you less curious about how the world works. Although these guys with the science here probably think there's a reason. If you think that this world is a dry run for the afterlife, you would think you would get extra points for not leaving it a smoking rack. At this point, I suppose this would normally devolve into a cringeworthy poem about Mother Earth, but I just don't have enough hippie in me to pull it off. And I don't think that that will do the job. We are going to continue screwing up the climate and building bigger bombs until we stop putting short-sighted psychopaths in charge of everything. Until we stop shitting where we eat. And when that big asteroid inevitably shows up someday, we'll wish we didn't spend quite so much on air conditioning.
So are we stopping here? Where are we supposed to walk?
But in the meantime, here we are, trying to show enough numbers that politicians will care a little for their next campaign cycle. We're in the streets, basically, pleading our case to those in power, trying to get them to see that cutting science budgets is not in their short-term best interest, trying to keep the barbarians from sacking the place, fighting for our civilization. Science may not have all the answers to everything, but for the problems that make our day-to-day lives better, for the problems that make us sick or kill us, it's really the only game in town. Science is pretty much the only way to get some of the answers our lives depend on. So we keep fighting to keep the lights on, because we have to.